A few weeks ago, my girlfriend and I decided to go for a short hike in the national forest, a short trip from where we live. We go on these hikes about every other week and love them. Getting out into the mountains and forest is therapeutic and something both Kimmy and I both enjoy very much. We're both in our early 20s and are relatively fit, and getting exercise exploring nature sure beats a musty old gym any day. At 11,973 feet high, Sierra Blanca is the tallest mountain in southern New Mexico. It's part of a network of ancient volcanoes, and in the spring it's very green, and spotting local wildlife like deer, rabbits, birds, squirrels is very common. Kimmy and I usually pack more than we need in our packs when we go hiking. Even though we usually only hike for 2 or 3 hours, we know all too well the perils that can befall hikers if the weather suddenly changes or one should get lost. So we always have plenty of snacks, water, and extra clothes, etc., just in case. I even started packing a compass. This may sound like a no-brainer, but we both know the area well, so we felt confident relying on our own internal compasses for the most part. Not to mention cell reception is usually okay enough to rely on for emergency calls. But still, having a compass just seemed like a smart hiking novelty to bring, and besides, it doesn't take up much space at all in a pack. It was a Saturday and very early, 5 a.m. Kimmy's not a morning person, but our hikes are one of the only times she's willing to compromise and get up super early. We grabbed our gear and essential coffee and headed out to the mountains. The national forest isn't far from where we live, but still Kimmy managed to fall back to sleep in the passenger seat while I drove. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon, and I recall thinking, I wish Kimmy was awake to see this. As we began to close the distance to the mountain, I realized there were dark clouds enshrouding the mountaintops. It appeared to be moving past the mountains, but I knew that meant trails would be wet and the forest would be most certainly misty from the rain. Not exactly the bright, sunny hiking trip either of us was hoping for, but this was our hiking trip, and while I knew Kimmy would complain, we weren't turning back. Arriving at the trailhead, the ground was definitely wet, but doable. We would have muddy shoes and damp clothes when we returned, but hey, I was feeling rugged that day. Kimmy, on the other hand, woke up groggy and complacent, and even mentioned putting off the hike. It took quite a bit of convincing before she finally gave in and lugged her backpack over her shoulders. We locked up the car and headed up the trail. East turned out to be full of amazing sights. Beautiful views of the misty valleys and lovely red flowers grew across green mountain slopes. Looking back at Kimmy, I often saw an impressed smile on her face, so I knew I had chosen well. We were about 3 hours into the hike, and Kimmy was starting to mention her fatigue and need to relieve herself. So we found a small green clearing with a lovely view of the misty valley and lay down a small blanket Kimmy had brought. I started preparing our snacks, and Kimmy mentioned she was going back into the forest to relieve herself. I felt great, a little winded, but I was loving this. The entire mountain was transformed after the storm. It felt bizarre and alien. After about 10 minutes, I realized Kimmy hadn't come back, so I stood and called out to her. My voice echoed throughout the forest, but Kimmy didn't answer. I began walking in the direction she went, calling out every few seconds, but she did not reply. My heart started pounding in my chest, and my walking became frantic, sprinting in all directions. "Kimmy! Kimmy!" I now screamed almost in a pleading tone, but there was still no reply. It was at this point I realized I had no idea the direction back to the campsite. I quite literally was lost. Now panic set in. I felt in my pockets for my cell phone and quickly realized my phone, as well as almost all of my equipment, were back at camp. I felt like I was going to have a heart attack. "Calm down, Greg. Calm down." I literally spoke the words aloud to myself, and after repeating them about 5 times, it worked. I calmed down enough to focus and checked what equipment I did have on me. In my pockets were my wallet, a lighter, compass, car keys, and on the key ring, a small flashlight. Okay, I thought, I can do this. I'll find Kimmy. I stared out in every direction trying to ascertain where the campsite must be, but it was no good. I had barely made any tracks to follow as the forest floor was very thick with deposits of leaves and grass and twigs that basically acted like an expandable cushion that made spotting almost any tracks impossible to the untrained eye. I could think of nothing to do but call out for Kimmy, so that's what I did. For over an hour. I kept thinking, it's only mid-morning. There's still plenty of light despite the mist. We will be fine. I'll find Kimmy. It will be okay. I called out again and again, and finally I heard something. But it was strange. I called out again, and this time I could hear the sound clearly, a woman softly giggling. I called out, "Hello, Kimmy, is that you? I'm over here." But the laughter stopped. "Kimmy," I shouted again and again, thinking maybe it was possible she was playing a joke on me, but why? This wasn't like Kimmy. We had been apart for more than an hour, and I was definitely lost. How did she find me without making a sound? Why isn't she answering my calls? I then started to get angry at the thought of her pranking me. So I shouted, "Damn it, Kimmy, you think it's funny? I thought I lost you. I was so afraid." But once again there was no reply. I started walking toward the direction of the laughter, every few seconds calling out, but there was no path at all. The area was full of weeds and very difficult to traverse. Then I heard it again, a woman, softly giggling, but this time it was very close. I called out, "Kimmy, stop. Please, I'm worried. It's not funny at all." Then I saw a movement and a shape in the tall, thick weeds. It was Kimmy. I would know that wet, dirty blonde hair anywhere. I shouted, "Kimmy, damn it, you're not funny. You scare the shit out of me," as I walked toward her. But as I approached, I could see she was in a crouched position, her head tilted down, close to her knees. "Kimmy, are you all right?" Now I was standing only 5 feet from her, and something was very wrong. Her breathing was bizarre. She was heaving with sharp, constant breaths, and wouldn't look at me. As I approached her, I reached out my hand and said, "Kimmy, oh my God, are you okay?" When suddenly a crashing sound came from behind me. A tremendous crashing sound that resembled that of several falling trees crashing to the ground at once. But when I turned to look, there was nothing, no source of the sound. So I turned back to Kimmy, and to my horror, she wasn't there anymore. I shouted, "Kimmy, what are you doing? Please come back." But once again, there was no reply. I was so confused and literally terrified at this point. Something was wrong with Kimmy. Was she hurt? Why would she run? What the hell made that terrible sound? Then I saw her again, about 200 feet away. She was standing just outside the tree line, looking out at the misty valley below. I ran to her. I didn't even call out. I literally just sprinted, full force toward her. When I got within 50 feet, I could hear that she was laughing, but why? It wasn't even a laugh I recognized. It was bizarre. She was standing so still, hands by her side. Kimmy's posture is never like this. She's fidgety and never still. Something's wrong with her. As the thought concluded, I was practically to her, when suddenly I saw a blur in my peripheral sight. I turned to see what it was, only to find nothing. It took less than 2 seconds, yet when I turned back to Kimmy, she was gone. And where she had been, standing, was the ledge of a sharp drop into a ravine. There was no way for me to stop my momentum. I plunged down from the cliff, falling into the ravine. I screamed as I repeatedly struck the sides of the slope. Rocks cut and pounded my limbs as I fell. The slope was extreme, but was not a straight fall, thank God. If it were, the 50-foot fall would have surely killed me. But as it was, I tumbled down the rocky slope and finally met its end. I lay still at the bottom, my breath knocked out of me, and I was in incredible pain. Despite the pain, I looked all around me for Kimmy. I thought surely the reason she disappeared is because she had fallen as well, but all around me was nothing but sliding rocks and twigs. No Kimmy. The pain was unbearable, and as I got my breath back, I felt my body to make sure no bones were broken. My ribs ached, my legs ached, my head ached, but my wrist was broken. I couldn't move it at all without nearly fainting, but after a few seconds, that's exactly what I did. Faint. Because the next time I opened my eyes, the skies were much darker. Not dark, just shadowed, as the sun must have made its way behind the mountain tops. I quickly determined that the time must be nearing evening, and that sparked panic in me. I had no idea where I was, nor where Kimmy is, and if it got dark, I would definitely not be able to find Kimmy while being injured and stuck at the bottom of a ravine. I started to cry. The pain was so intense, and I had no idea what to do. I used all of my strength to stand, being ever mindful of my wrist. I could not faint again. That would mean certain failure finding Kimmy. I don't know if any of you have ever tried lifting yourself from the ground with one arm, but let me tell you, it's incredibly difficult. At least it was for me. Still, I managed it, and when I looked around me, much of my hope fell. There was no way I could climb out of the steep ravine. I had to follow along it. 2 directions, east or west, presumably. I carefully and painfully pulled the compass from my pocket. When I opened it, I stared at it completely perplexed. It didn't stutter and rotate slowly as before. Now it spun wildly and did not stop. I put the compass back in my pocket and for a second attempted to explain to myself what was causing the compass needle to spin. Okay, I thought, how does a compass work? The compass needle is a basic magnet floating on a frictionless surface so that it can rotate. The needle is then moved by the Earth's electromagnetic field, attracted to the opposite polarity of itself. Maybe it was the thunderstorm. Do thunderstorms create electromagnetic interference? I'm no physicist, and honestly, between the pain and my desire to find Kimmy and get the hell out of here, that answer was satisfactory for now. I began limping down what I presumed to be the easterly direction of the ravine. Why I thought it was east is beyond me. Looking back, considering the compass failed, the sun was behind the mountaintop, and I could recognize nothing. But I kept thinking east. It was east because I knew east was the trailhead. East was civilization. East was where help would be. Walking along the ravine, I felt numb. I could barely feel my legs. My ribs ached with sharp pains and throbbed constantly. Looking down at my feet, I could see blood on my shoes, obviously coming from my leg, but there was no time to address that now. When I looked back up ahead of me, I froze. There was Kimmy, standing in the middle of the ravine facing me, less than 100 feet away. She stood, as she had, on the cliff's edge, hands by her side, chest heaving, but now I could see her face, her eyes. You will not believe me when I say this, but at that moment I knew with absolute certainty, this woman was not my girlfriend. Even at a distance I could see her eyes, her face. My Kimmy had never looked like this. She looked inhuman. This thing had Kimmy's clothes, Kimmy's body, Kimmy's face, but it was not Kimmy. And as I thought this, the thing's chest stopped heaving. It appeared to stop breathing entirely. It began to walk backwards slowly, at first, but then broke into a sprint. A sprint on all 4 limbs, running backwards. It was horrific. Its face now turned round on its back, facing the sky, in an expression I cannot explain. The sounds it made. It was the giggling, but now no longer resembled a woman at all. More like some unknown animal. An animal that did not belong in these woods. I stayed standing still, staring in the direction the thing had fled to. I stood in shock for a very long time. How long I cannot say, but when I finally came out of the shock, it was dark. This time true dark. It was nighttime. And hopelessness set in. I turned in the opposite direction of the thing and began walking, shining my tiny pocket flashlight to see the path before me. Was I walking west? South? Who the hell cares, I thought. I looked up into the night sky and was surprised by beautiful stars and nebulae. The mist had cleared. The storm's remnants were gone. I walked for less than 2 hours before I heard talking and lights. Bright flashlights from above the ravine in the surrounding woods. Then I heard it. A woman calling out, "Greg, Greg, baby, please answer." It was Kimmy, my Kimmy, the real Kimmy. So I called out and was rescued. Kimmy would later claim when she went to relieve herself, she had seen a deer, and when she tried following it, she became disoriented in the mist and lost her direction. She claimed she never heard my calls for her, and I never told her what I saw. 3 weeks have passed, and my wrist is mostly healed. My body no longer aches, but when she sleeps beside me and I see her face in the moonlight, I can't look away. I barely breathe, and I'm afraid she will wake and see me staring at her. But I can't help it. I keep thinking at any moment her face will contort, her body will contort, and this beautiful girl beside me will reveal the truth that she is not my girlfriend. She is the thing I saw in the mountains.